Paul McCartney, composer, musician, and ex-Beatle. How well could you endure loneliness?
Francis Roy Plomley was born January 20th, 1914, in Kingston upon Thames, Surrey. He was the only surviving child of Francis John Plomley, a pharmaceutical chemist, and Eleanor Maud, née Wigg. He attended King's College School in Wimbledon. After leaving school, he tried several occupations. He worked for an estate agency, in advertising, and in publishing, and dabbled in acting, securing small roles. But over time, he gravitated towards broadcasting, a field in which his combination of curiosity, composure, and skill would prove well suited. Castaway on a desert island.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're privileged to have on our desert island a man whose tireless activities and brilliant work in the field...
I still think we should use that studio at Tottering Towers.
Oh, don't keep harping on that. Anyway...
In 1936, Plomley joined the International Broadcasting Company, IBC, which operated stations such as Radio Normandy and Poste Parisienne, broadcasting to British and international audiences. In those pre-war years, he was involved in writing, production, and presentation, traveling between France and London. He hosted shows like Radio Normandy Calling, often staged in theaters at British seaside resorts, and in some of those seasons, his shows outperformed comparable BBC offerings in popularity. This experience gave him first-hand exposure to a more commercially minded, entertainment-oriented style, one less formal than much of the BBC output at the time. As war loomed in Europe, commercial broadcasting across continental Europe was disrupted. Plomley was in France in 1940 with his then-new wife, Diana Wong. They escaped via a circuitous route back to Britain during the fall of France and lost their possessions. This period was formative. With the war, radio became central to both information and morale. Many lighter entertainment programs, variety shows, music, and morale-boosting content came into demand. Plomley had long been considering ways to combine personal stories and music, and the wartime context sharpened that sensibility. He had done some minor roles in films as his initial ambition was to become an actor. But as time progressed, he realized radio was his true calling. Late in 1941, Plomley conceived what would become Desert Island Discs. One evening at home, he thought of the idea of asking someone what records they would take were they stranded on a desert island, an interleaving discussion of their lives with their musical choices. The BBC accepted, and the first broadcast of Desert Island Discs aired January 29, 1942. Initially, it was simply interview plus musical selections. Over time, the format matured. Guests, called castaways, would also choose one book besides the automatically provided works like the Bible and Shakespeare, and a luxury item of no survival utility. Plomley presented Desert Island Discs from its start until his death in 1985, a span of 43 years and nearly 1,800 episodes. He prepared carefully for each guest, often meeting them beforehand, building rapport, doing research, guiding the conversation gently. He used the music selections to open windows into memory, identity, values, and mood. Under his stewardship, the show developed a consistent pace and tone, reflective, intimate, lightly probing. Alongside Desert Island Discs, Plomley was involved in other broadcasting work. He chaired the radio panel game Many a Slip from the mid-1960s to late 70s, appeared in other quiz or panel shows, produced feature programs, and wrote plays, a novel, and screenplays. In 1975, he was made an Officer of the Order of the British Empire in recognition of his services to broadcasting. In 1979, he was named BBC Radio Personality of the Year. Roy Plomley died May 28, 1985, at his home in Putney, aged 71. His death marked the end of an era, but the program he created lived on, being handed over to successors, Michael Parkinson, then Sue Lawley, Kirsty Young, and eventually Lauren Laverne, who have maintained its essential structure. To understand Plomley's achievement, one needs to see what the radio landscape in the UK was like across the decades from the 1930s through the 1980s. In the 1930s, the BBC had almost a monopoly in UK domestic broadcasting. The style was often formal. Many broadcasts were talk, drama, music of classical or serious type. But around the fringes, there was pressure for variety, pop culture, and lighter entertainment. After the war, in 1945, the BBC reorganized its radio services. The Light program was introduced, absorbing many of the entertainment styles from the Wartime Forces program. The Home service continued for more serious speech and information, and the Third program was set up for highbrow culture and arts. These three services, Light, Home, Third, shaped the UK radio world. Variety, comedy, music, quiz shows, and panel games were immensely popular in the Light program, which brought a sense of leisure, warmth, companionship, and escapism. Radio had not really faced serious competition in the UK until much later. Most people got their entertainment through the BBC. Recording, editing, and production quality were improving over time. Listener research began to inform what kinds of programs the public liked. By the 1950s and 60s, culture was shifting. Records and popular music rose in importance. Youth culture challenged older norms. Audiences wanted more immediacy and less formality. Commercial radio in the UK proper was largely absent until the 70s, when independent local stations were licensed. Meanwhile, the BBC's Light program eventually was split in 1967 into BBC Radio 1 for pop music and BBC Radio 2, more entertainment and middle-of-the-road music, while home service became Radio 4. The third program became Radio 3. Thus, by the time Plomley was well established, radio was both more competitive from within the BBC's own spectrum of services and more listener-oriented. There were greater expectations of personality, variety, informality, music choice, and intimate interviews. Desert Island Discs was part of that shift, not aggressive or sensational, but human, reflective, and musical. Desert Island Discs achieved an impact that has proved enduring. Here are some of the effects and significance. Over thousands of episodes, it's collected memories, voices, and musical tastes, as well as personal lives of a wide cross-section of British society and beyond. Because the format is structured around what music means, what people remember, and what they value, Desert Island Discs has become more than a light interview show. It's a living archive of cultural history. The show's model, asking guests about their music and listening for emotional cues and letting them open up without pressure, has influenced how many interview programs approach their guests. Rather than confrontation or exposure, there's recognition of dignity, context, and personal narrative. The program does not restrict itself to celebrities, narrowly defined. Over time, guests have come from varied fields: science, politics, arts, sport, and entertainment. Their choices include classical, popular, folk, and world music. The result is listeners are exposed to unfamiliar names and unfamiliar sounds, and there's a sense that everyone's life story matters, not just the famous or glorious. Why Desert Island Discs remains relevant.
Roy Plomley, the man who presented the BBC radio programme Desert Island Discs for over 40 years, has died. He was 71.
Even after Plomley's death, the show has continued and remains relevant. In recent polls and industry evaluations, it's been called the greatest radio program of all time. Its return listener base remains strong, and the format still appeals because of its mix of personality, memory, music, and storytelling. Even with podcasts and many media alternatives, there's something about the ritual of listening, the continuity, the way a single voice asks questions and a guest reveals themselves. Its archive is valuable, its content reusable, its format adaptable. Plomley was a pioneer of a style of broadcasting that blended musical choice, biographical narrative, and human reflection. He caught a moment, wartime, when the public needed connection, post-war, when radio was central, and later, when modern media began to fragment. His creation bridged many eras, and its impact is both deep and wide. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think Desert Island Discs will continue for several more decades? Let us know in the comments section below.